Hi everyone. Welcome back to See the Invisible, living with an invisible or rare disease. My name is Rhonda Franny Jefferson, and thank you so much for taking some time out to listen. If you're new to this podcast, I want to welcome you, and I hope that you like this podcast. And what I'm trying to do is I hope to lend support or a voice to those who have an illness, as well as to the caregivers, such as our loved ones and other people that we know who help lend support to us. So today we are continuing our episodes dealing with asthma. To repeat some of the things that I mentioned at the beginning of the last episode, which was the first one on asthma, and having just previously finished up our episodes on allergies, there can be a link between the two, both allergies and asthma. And I will also begin to touch on a subject that pertains not only to allergies, but to many aspects of our healthcare. Now, I did go over, like I said, a little bit last week. I just want to reiterate some of that today as well. And that topic is accessibility. I did email someone, I previously mentioned that as well, trying to get some information about disparity in treatment, and I haven't heard back, so I'm just going to have to reach out to her again and see if I can get some information, especially since it's been a little bit more than a week. And in the first episode regarding asthma, I gave some basic information and things to look out for while we're discussing the topic. And I do usually say with most of the episodes that while we may be reviewing something specifically related to asthma, there are a lot of aspects in treatment that pertain more widely, just not to a particular illness. So, there may be some things that, yes, of course, they're going to specifically deal with asthma, but there are some things intermingled in there that, pertain to different types of illnesses, such as advocacy and things like that. So before I get into some of the things I want to review, I just want to say that I am in no way a medical, insurance, or legal expert. If you do have any questions in those areas, please be sure that you contact a specialist in that field. I will discuss topics or articles that I have found on publicly accessible means. Links and or information on these sources will be in the description of the podcast. Any opinion discussed is based on my experiences and my understanding of that particular topic and how it pertains to my life with my illness. It's not meant to and should not be used in place of any medical advice. So now that all of that is taken care of, I do just want to go back a little bit to advocacy and equity, disparity, accessibility, things like that in regards to our healthcare. So as I've grown and I've had more life experience, I think I am beginning to understand the whole topic of accessibility better than I ever have. I've come to realize that accessibility is not just being able to either afford a doctor, have your insurance cover it, be able to get to a doctor. It can be all of those things or just one, but each one has an impact on how our healthcare is handled. As I've matured and grown, I've come to realize it almost seems, to me at least, that healthcare is almost a luxury. And as I've said before, it's not just about paying the bills, though that can be a really big part of the issue. And many years ago, I read a stat that said a certain percentage of all bankruptcies are related to medical expenses or something that happened medically, such as being out of work because of a medical episode. So, that is something that people have to do every day just to make sure that they have the access or means to actually continue a quality of life. And there's just so many things that are not covered too by insurance, such as some medical equipment, converting a home to be handicapped accessible if that's needed in your case, the traveling, childcare if you have children, and you're traveling for an appointment, or if just one of your children has an appointment and it's a long way away. And then also just limits on what healthcare provides, such as a certain number of appointments for this, type of treatment, or, a stay in a rehabilitation center, because you've had some type of surgery and need, occupational or physical therapy from that, limitations on those, which overall, affect the person's health as well as their mental health. So it's physical and mental health. And, it's just actually, in my opinion, going to end up costing more. And I'm not going over these things repeatedly just to vent or complain. What I do want to keep doing is bringing out awareness and trying to bring up points that maybe not everybody has thought of before. Because, I've been working and paid for my own insurance for over 20 years now. And since that time, I've gone from paying, accounting for, say, inflation and cost of, living increases, I paid a pretty reasonable premium at the time when it was just me. And, overall, my insurance covered almost everything. I did have a surgery once where I had to go into a rehabilitation center. And I think for that whole time, it was at least a week in the hospital and probably 2 weeks in the rehabilitation center. And it was about $115 for the actual cost. Time goes by, the needs of an individual and society changes, so things change along with it. So, of course, we've seen cost of living increases, there's inflation, but trying to account for those figures, the cost of my insurance has probably quadrupled, and that's taking into account premiums as well as deductibles and co-insurance. And that is, like I said, more than just natural inflation. And I've had children since then, so yes, of course, my premium, I know that's going to go up, but again, comparing, say, an individual policy from what I had back to when I just got out of college to now is completely different. And, I have come to the realization, too, that childcare is a big concern if I have an appointment and I have to go to a different city, which when you have a rare illness or a chronic illness, you may sometimes be in that position. And also one of my children, he has appointments sometimes at a facility that's 2 hours away. Now, fortunately, with some changes in technology, I'm now able to attend some of those visits virtually, whether it's for me or my child. So that has helped out. But, if there's ever the occasion where you need to be there in person, it's not something they can really see over a camera. That's, again, a big impact. And, seeing things that have happened over the years and some experiences myself as well, I wonder how far in advance those who make the decisions about what's covered by insurance think about the cost, not just now, but further down the road. So if someone's in a position where they cannot afford a medication or a certain treatment at one point in time, that condition's going to continue to get worse. And somewhere, whether it be months or years from now, the treatment that they then have to take, whether it's surgery that's more invasive, more expensive or more aggressive treatments, those are coming about because initially they may not have been able to afford or have access to the treatment that they needed. So in the future, it's actually going to end up costing more. So looking at healthcare in just the here and now, it doesn't really do it justice because, I can give a minor example in that one of the medications that I was taking could cause cataracts, but this medicine was approved because it was very, very, very inexpensive compared to some of the other medications. But this one that had the bad side effects, it caused cataracts, it could cause liver cancer, it could cause like this whole slew of things. but it cost about $3 a month. So I have had cataract surgery. I somehow thought I was able to get off the medication without ever having cataracts, but no, I still have the cataracts, but eventually my insurance did start covering the more expensive one. But basically my system is now messed up because for so many years I took very high doses of a medication that was not meant to be taken for that long of a period of time. So it seems that those who make some of the decisions have a very narrowed focus and aren't looking at the overall cost, since insurance, for-profit medical companies, whether it be about pharmacy or pharmaceuticals or anything like that, they're looking at it right now. Whereas I think as human beings looking at each other, we need to look at not just the here and now, but the future as well. So, it's over the last few weeks, I know I mentioned last week, my father has had some ill health. My uncle, who I'm in charge of making his decisions, my aunt just passed away in April. And, I see some of the things that he has to go through, and then my husband's mother has cancer too. So there's just a lot of things going on, and I'm seeing a lot of differences in how healthcare is really distributed. Now, everyone's getting some extent of healthcare, but it's not to the degree necessarily that I think it can be. I think there can be more done. And I'm in no way saying this in terms of the care that they're getting, because there's someone that I've met, I think 3 times now at my dad's when I go to see him, and she is amazing. We all love her, So the people who are actually working in the facilities, they're caring, they're taking care to the best of their abilities, but they're understaffed, I think, and you have so many people that are patients or residents, and I just really feel as well that to overwork or to give people more that they can actually take care of, it affects everybody as well. The mental, physical, emotional health of both the residents and patients, as well as those that are working in the facilities. It's just not focusing on the human being as an individual. It looks like, again, my opinion, because I just have to stress that, again, in my opinion, it just feels like, healthcare is not going in the direction really that we need it. And I'm sure that there are millions of other people, at least around the world, who may think this to one extent or another, depending on how their healthcare system is. And if you're not in the U.S., then, I'm stressing this is for the U.S.-based healthcare as we see it now. It's also really, it's making me think too that I want to be able to leave some type of, I don't want to say legacy, but maybe footprint for my children. I don't want to think, that my children are having access to, less health care, not adequate health care, or health care that's costing, quadruple what it was for me. I want them to be assured as they grow and they have their own families that they will have access to the health care that's needed. So I apologize that, I did go off a little bit on that subject, but, again, I just think it's something that needs to be reiterated. I've done things such as created change.org petitions. They really haven't taken off. There's a couple that I've linked to some of my previous descriptions in the podcast, change.org, links about the cost of EpiPens, the cost of diabetes supplies. I can add in there, we're talking about asthma. I know the cost of my inhaler is outrageous if I haven't met my deductible and coinsurance yet. And these are things that you need to live. These are necessities. These are not luxuries, but it just feels like they're being treated as such. So now to get back on focus with asthma, I want to go over some of the different types of asthma. And while the list that I saw while reviewing and researching for the articles gave a number of different types of asthma, going through them all, it really seems like it comes down to allergic and non-allergic asthma. Now there's some subcategories in there where you may have more than one type of asthma as listed in the article, but again, it's like a subcategory. So we'll just go over some of those because it is important to recognize what type you actually have, because you need to have it, accurately diagnosed so that the treatment that you receive is accurate. So I know in exploring this, the doctor who diagnosed me with asthma, he's now retired, but he didn't tell me which type I have. And then I went to a pulmonologist then, and she's just recently left the area. So, I'm reading through some of these articles and thinking, I'm not even sure which type of asthma I have, or do I have, say, non-allergic asthma, and it's triggered by one of these three different things. So, there's just a lot going on with the different types of asthma. And so it has made me realize I really need to bring this up with my next appointment to make sure I understand what to look for and to make sure that, it's being treated in the right way. So, again, there's really, to me, the allergic and non-allergic asthma. Allergic asthma, just as the name implies, is usually triggered by some type of allergic reaction to something, and usually those who have this type of asthma have some other allergies such as hay fever, food and drug allergies. I have both of those, maybe some eczema, and the range of asthma can be very mild to very, very severe. What I've read in more than one article, though, is that usually when you have asthma as an adult, or you've had asthma as a child through adulthood, then usually these types of attacks and the episodes are much more severe. Allergic asthma also does tend to be hereditary. It doesn't mean it has to be inherited, but in many cases it is. So you may see it in families where more than one person has asthma. I know that my husband and I, as he did have asthma as a child but outgrew it, we're always, just trying to make sure that we're paying attention to our kids if they've overexerted themselves during allergy season, things like that, to make sure that they're not having any breathing issues. Now, many of the articles I've read, no matter which type of asthma or subcategory it was in, gave a lot of detailed information where they were talking about, these types of cells or these chemicals. But really, just to kind of simplify it, when you have allergic asthma, some type of allergen, so, mold, mildew, pollen, sets off your immune system. That leads to an increase in eosinophils, which are like a white blood cell, which can lead to your asthma. And there's usually things that, if tests are run, like lab tests or any other type of testing, will indicate if you have these allergies, such as something called FeNO or nitric oxide, and the high levels of eosinophils. Usually this is treated with some type of inhaled corticosteroid. That really helps with the inflammation. So even without the asthma, as I do have an autoinflammatory disease, one of the treatments I have are steroids, so that helps with the inflammation. And a really important reason why this needs to be diagnosed and treated accurately is having a constant state of inflammation around your lungs and airways. That can actually create types of damage. It can affect your airflow, so you don't want long periods of time with inflammation in your airway, or anywhere really for that reason. Then, like I said, you have the non-allergic non-allergic asthma, where there's a lot of subcategories under that as well. And again, a lot of crossovers too. So with the non-allergic asthma, it really is the broad term that covers types of asthma that are not brought on by allergies. One of the types is an adult onset asthma. And so it is possible to develop asthma as an adult. But, as I said a few moments ago, that usually when you have asthma as an adult, it tends to be more severe than other cases if you have it just as a child. What I found fascinating under some of the statistics or numbers on those who have adult onset asthma are those who are more prone to develop it. So one of the categories of people who may actually develop adult onset asthma are women who have some type of hormonal changes. But this also means not just menopause, as a lot of people's minds, I think that may jump to, or pregnancy as well. So that's a type of hormonal change, so you're more at risk. And then also if you take estrogen, once you've started menopause, and you're on that for a long extended period of time, that can increase your chances. Sometimes it's triggered by a virus or a cold or a flu. So really that's kind of scary in itself, that something may have lied dormant but can be triggered by something like this. If you already have allergies but don't have asthma, as an adult you're more at risk for developing. And this was kind of a surprise to me. It said especially if you're allergic to cats. So apparently in studies it's been found that if you have an allergy to cats, you're more apt or have more of a chance to develop adult onset allergies. Also, if you have some type of heartburn, some type of acid reflux, that can increase your chances. And those who are exposed a lot of times environmentally to like chemicals, mold, mildew, things that are considered allergens to begin with. Now, a lot of these subcategories of asthma, they're a lot of times pretty clear in what type or what causes the episode. There is exercise-induced asthma, and it may not necessarily just be exercise. It could be any type of extended physical exertion, so you could be working where, you have a lot of movement or you're lifting heavy things, where that can trigger that as well. So it's not necessarily just, an exercise such as running, jogging, anything like that. It could actually just be your everyday life if you have a very active work or leisure life. So it's something to keep an eye on and to see a doctor if you notice that you're actually, starting to develop this. So one of the things I did find very, very interesting is if you're in a tier of athlete that's considered the elite athletes, they are sometimes more at risk of having this type of asthma. So if you're like me, would think that someone who, runs up a basketball court hundreds of times during a game or, can run a marathon wouldn't necessarily have this. But yes, they are actually or can be, more apt to get this type of asthma. It actually did then explain to me something that I do have a relative who has very, very severe asthma, but they're a wonderful athlete as well. And, my mind used to be like, well, how is that treated? So he can become an athlete. He can, continue to play sports because I know he loves playing sports, but he does have asthma as well. And some things that you really don't think about, like a few moments ago, I mentioned, breathing in certain things that might trigger a type of episode. But if you think about the different types of, elite athletes, if you think of, the swimmers that are constantly in chlorinated pools, they gave an example in the article I read too about ice cleaning equipment. So, the chemicals and the machines that they use to actually clean ice for hockey games, figure skating, things like that, or anything that, involves your breathing. So I mentioned a marathon earlier. You kind of have to regulate your breathing. Same thing with swimming, going up and down, regulating your breathing. So there was a lot of surprising information in this particular subsection of asthma. Now, I've mentioned eosinophilic asthma, so I'm honestly very glad that I've seen that on a commercial at least, so I had some idea of how to say it. But this type of asthma usually develops in adulthood, even though going back to the allergic, the very beginning where we went over allergic asthma, that people did tend to have higher levels of eosinophils. It does tend to develop as an adult and can be very severe. A lot of times it does not necessarily react or respond to the treatment of the corticosteroids. So, it's something that has to be very highly monitored, and, it's, again, more severe when it's developed as an adult. And it can impact like your whole airway, your whole respiratory system, anywhere from the sinuses to the lungs. Again, when I look at some of the factors, that people can actually develop like small polyps in their nose. And, I kind of wonder sometimes, because I've had those in my nose, but, I don't know if it's related to this or if it's something else that might, be causing it. There's a cough variant asthma, which to me, from reading the articles, almost sounds like it's part of some of the other categories of asthma, but it can sometimes just be a symptom or type on its own. So most of the time, it's children who are more likely to have this type. And as far as the cough goes, instead of, like when you have a respiratory tract infection or bronchitis or something, you may have a wet cough. If you have cough variant asthma, the cough tends to be very dry though. So going back to look at some of the asthma categories that go more and more or go hand in hand with allergies, is, and I'm going to try to say this correctly, is allergic bronchopulmonary mycosis. And that actually is pretty rare though. It's when some type of fungi actually start to build within the tracheobronchial tree. I've seen like images of this, and it's actually, pretty intriguing how that can grow within the airway. But it can normally be among those who have cystic fibrosis. And a lot of times, not all, but a lot of times, the type of fungus that it is Aspergillus. There's also aspirin-induced asthma, whose name is kind of misleading because it's not just aspirin. It's actually NSAIDs as well. And it So with the aspirin-induced asthma, also things such as ibuprofen, Aleve, those are all considered NSAIDs or non-steroidal, and so not just aspirin, but also things like Aleve, ibuprofen, things that help with inflammation, that can come on by, or that type of asthma attack can come on by using any of those over-the-counter medications. So aspirin-induced asthma is, really pretty surprising to me. For one thing, it is misnamed. It is actually aspirin or NSAIDs, and those stand for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. One of the ones that we see probably most often when we go to the store is Aleve or ibuprofen, but usually this appears in adults, and it can be very severe as well. So make sure, if you do have symptoms of asthma, shortness of breath, trouble breathing, chest pain, if you've just taken ibuprofen or an NSAID, I would, and again, I'm not giving medical advice, but if it were me, I would probably mention that to my doctor to see if I might fall into that category. Now, there's also asthma with fixed airflow obstruction, and where I was mentioning with the allergic asthma that, not treated properly, there can be a lot of inflammation that damages or changes the airway. That happens with this type. It's some type of obstruction appears within your airway, and that can sometimes be due to the inflammation, can sometimes be also after some type of tracheotomy or other things that will actually cause a blockage in the airway. Now, just to touch base on some of these, or these last two, I've kind of gone over these in some ways, but work-related asthma, that, is something, say if you're working at a pool where you're constantly breathing in the chlorine or any other type of chemical, if you work with things that have a lot of smoke around it, that can all lead to work-related asthma. And my thought process too, it may not even just be work-related. If you live near one of these types of places that may emit fumes, smoke, things like that, then you're kind of getting that secondhand as well. And nocturnal or nighttime asthma is a sleep disturbance, so you're not getting enough sleep. I would probably say, to me, this would be probably the hardest one because I have a hard time sleeping anyway. And if I were to be woken up by a coughing fit or anything like that, getting back to sleep would be extremely hard. And, studies already say that we're not getting enough rest to begin with. So to be woken up, that affects our quality of life. And then the last one is considered, or is called asthma with obesity. And, I have struggled with my weight for most of my life. So, I kind of look at this and, one of my thoughts were, okay, well, I understand, I have more weight to pull. So, someone of the same height, I'm actually carrying more weight. So, of course, I'm going to, have more trouble breathing because of that. But reading a description here, it was actually pretty interesting that when you think about where, in a lot of people, the excess weight distributes, it's a lot of times around the chest, it's around the abdomen, and, if I'm laying down, if that weight distributes closer to my chest, of course that's putting pressure then on my breathing. Also, fatty tissues can produce inflammatory substances. And I'm reading this from one of the articles from Everyday Health on this. So just the fat tissue itself can lead to inflammation. So this is one of those little nuggets where it's good to know, not just for this particular topic, but just overall knowing what can possibly lead to the inflammation. So these are, some of the most common, or actually, according to one article, it said these were all of the different types of asthma and what I consider to be the subcategories of the different types of asthma, really split into allergic and non-allergic. And you can have more than the one type. So it could be triggered by, let's just say, exercise, and then also occupationally if you're around chemicals. So in everyday life, going through this, there's probably a lot of people that we know that have asthma, but we do not see, the TV depictions of someone who's constantly using an inhaler and out all the time. People with asthma, can lead and do lead a very fulfilling life. It's just, we have to be cognizant of some of the things that trigger an asthma episode, be able to relay to our doctors if there's any changes in that. But again, most importantly, make sure that we have access to that medical care. So this is probably one of the more technical aspects, or one of the more technical episodes for asthma, where if you did listen to the allergy episodes, there were a lot of tips about how to handle that if you're a child, trying to explain to your child how to handle it, how to adjust if you're going into young adulthood, all the way up to living with it as an adult. So we'll do something similar with these episodes for asthma. So again, this is probably more technical than the rest of the episodes, but there was a lot of good information in the links that I'm going to put in this particular episode. Sometimes I focus on maybe one or two core articles because, that tends to give the most information. But, for the different types, it was actually kind of a compilation of a few different websites and articles within those sites to really learn some interesting information that, even being diagnosed with asthma, that I had no idea about. So I hope that you found this a little more informative and not quite so dry about explaining the different types. But again, just kind of wanted to go over those. So, if you're experiencing, say, again, a response after you've taken some asthma or aspirin or an NSAID, or if you're noticing when you're around a certain location that you're having trouble breathing, maybe, again, letting your doctor know, but recognizing if there's some type of trigger, such as a pollutant in that area. So, knowledge is power. I know we've heard that a lot since we were kids, most likely, but it really is, especially in being an advocate for your own health care. The doctors, nurses, they can do their best for us, but we also need to recognize some of the symptoms and triggers so that we can let them know what's going on. And I'm going to stop here for this week. Like I said, going forward, we'll kind of go through some tips on how to deal with asthma as, you grow from a child and your parents, what as parents we should be going over with our children if they are diagnosed with asthma all the way up to adulthood. So I did emphasize too in my last episode, with some issues that are going on with my family, I'm going to try to get one episode out a week. If it does take longer than a week, I apologize. It's just some things are kind of fluid and up in the air right now. My father, we live close to where my father is, extremely close, but my husband's mother, my mother-in-law, she's in a different state. It's not extremely far away, but also we're dealing with the rules about visitation on COVID. It sounds like it's different for visiting my mother-in-law than it is for visiting my father. So my husband hasn't even been able to see his mother in a while. He wanted to go up this weekend, but he wasn't able to when he called and asked about visitation. So I hope that everybody got a little something out of this episode, and just kind of some food for thought about the accessibility issues. And if you do enjoy this podcast, please make sure that you're sharing, or if you listen to it through an app where you can leave a comment or feedback, please feel free to do so. It helps other people find it a little bit easier. All right, so I appreciate, again, everybody taking some time out to listen, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.